Hey everybody, this is Kevin Purcell with the Theotek podcast, again here on Tuesday night. We are live, and it's election night, and I'm glad. I want to announce that I have suspended my campaign. I've chosen that since I no longer see a road forward at the independent nomination for president, that I'm going to throw all my weight behind Rick Mansfield, who frankly is a much better president than I would anyway. So
modern Whigs for the win.
Modern Whigs are the new Tories. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. Hey, Rick, good to see you here tonight.
Hey, good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and then we've got Antoine, who is laughing hysterically at just the thought of me serving in office. Just sends him on the floor laughing just about. How you doing, Antoine?
Doing all right tonight, guys.
Good. And if you're a regular viewer of the podcast on YouTube or live on Hangouts, or if you listen to it, you'll notice that we have a fourth tonight who is a special guest. This is David Timms, and he is with William Jessup University. He is the dean and faculty of theology in the School of Christian Leadership, a professor, and we're excited to have him with us. The reason that we invited him to do so is that he wrote a recent article called 3 Technology Truths About Christian Millennials over at one of our friend sites, churchtechtoday.com. And so, David, welcome to the Theotek podcast. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. It's fun to be with you guys tonight.
Tell us, where is William Jessup? And if you want, give a little plug for the university.
Yeah, sure. Well, you're East Coast and I'm West Coast, so we're in the Sacramento area in Northern California. School's about 76 years old and about 1,200 students, and I've been up here about 5 years. Great school, and reaches about, the area reaches about 700 different churches that send students our direction, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, this I really, to be honest, I hadn't heard about the school until I read your article. So, but it's always interesting to learn about how other brothers and sisters in Christ are trying to prep people to serve the kingdom in the church and outside the church. So this is his website here. If you go to jessup.edu and then search for him, there's a fine picture of an attractive man from down under. It sounds like you're telling us where you're from. All right. Well, we thank you for coming and being a part of our show tonight. We're going to jump right in and look at the article that you wrote called 3 Technology Truths About Christian Millennials. We'll have the link in the show notes. If you're watching this live, you can find it in the description of the show so you can follow along. But you talked about this, tell us, first of all, what's the basic gist of the article and why you wrote it?
Yeah, I took a bunch of students down to Southern California to see the Museum of the Bible. It's been doing the tour of the country for a few years, and so I had 13 or 14 students that wanted to see it before I headed to Washington, D.C., and its permanent home. And so we popped down there, and one morning we were just having a conversation, and it became a conversation about technology and faith and just how these students integrate all of that. So it was a fascinating conversation, and it led to this blog post, I guess, just reflecting on the things that they said, or sometimes the things they didn't say, but I was hearing anyway. And just a couple of basic things that I hope might spark this kind of conversation in other places too.
Yeah, and you've got 3 basic points in this first one where you say technology makes information more accessible and learning less common. Tell us what you mean by that, and go ahead. Yeah,
so basically what I found were the students who are, for the most part, 18 to 22-year-olds, they could zip around and they could find all sorts of information from all sorts of sites. But we got talking about how this plays out in their faith journey, and what I discovered was that they can find a verse in the Bible in a heartbeat, but they don't know the Bible. They can give them a key word and they can find you the text quickly, but as far as actually learning and soaking in it, it just wasn't there. And so as we began to talk about biblical literacy, or began to talk about the way that they soak in Scripture, discovered that they have all the information, but they're really running about an inch deep. And I'm not sure if that's just a product of their age. It might be, and you gentlemen can kind of chime in on that, or whether it's also partly a product of the role of technology. In other words, they haven't had to soak in anything. And so as we talked about some of the tougher issues in life, the deeper existential questions that people have, they really have no biblical grounding or theological framework for deep reflection. And it's not coming out of the church, and I don't know that I'm faulting the church, but I'm also noticing that technology is not necessarily encouraging this depth of thought. So my first point was simply about information rather than learning, and just wondered whether that's a conversation starter for people.
Yeah, it's almost that the old verse, "Thy word have I hid in my phone that I might not know the Bible," or something like that. I don't know. But you said that it's not coming out of the church. So what you're saying is you don't think the church is doing a good job of really discipling these young people to really know the mind of Christ, as in knowing the Word of God in that Psalm 119 kind of way.
Yeah. And when I say the church, that's a very broad statement. And I think some congregations are doing exceedingly well. And even when I have kids young people and students who grew up with Awana. In my day, it was Bible Bowl way back when, but there's a lot of scripture memorization and so on. What I'm still finding is that the ability to put together texts into a cohesive framework is just not there. And so I think some congregations are doing really well on the scripture memorization side of things, but maybe not connecting the dots. Some congregations just aren't doing well, period. But the technology piece is a piece that really was of interest to me, because the technology means that they don't have to pursue this anymore. They can just look up verses to read when I'm depressed, and they can actually type that in and have the verses pop up, and they don't have to reflect on them very deeply at all.
So let me ask David, because it's as a guy who's been doing mobile in technology for a long-ish time, a little bit longer than most folks want to admit, carrying a phone around sometimes. That's something that I ran across, from both ends, one instructionally and then also as a user of technology. And I would find myself being able, over time, being able to kind of throw the question kind of back at leaders, teachers who would say, hey, listen, you know the text, but you don't know the text. You can give to me a verse, but you can't give to me, what the meat of the verse is. And my retort was always, but you never taught me how to get to the meat. You've only asked me to repeat to you. So we had our nightly, when at least in my case, I was saved after I got to college. We had our nightly remember your scriptures, do your devotionals, but none of those practices. And this maybe boils into how we really do discipleship more than anything else, really got into how do I contemplate about Scripture? How do I think about God? How do I think about the things of God in such a way that allows me to create a better understanding of who He is and who I am in relation to Him, rather than, can I just quickly find the 12 verses that talk about how not to get angry with you and throw this Bible against your head?
Exactly.
So when I read your point there, I said, all right, there is definitely a technology accessible piece. Socrates even said, you folks are going to write stuff down and forget that it was supposed to be in your head first. And kind of him being against writing even because it didn't allow your mind to be in it. But would you also look at that, the technology of how we who are instructing the faith are actually asking people to engage the text or even engage God, and as maybe probably part of that hurdle of why folks are not getting it, or why maybe even the youth that you looked at probably aren't getting that contemplative nature of the relationship with God.
Yeah, Antoine, I think that's right. So this afternoon I sat down with a young guy. He's 19. Asked if he could have half an hour with me. This is a couple of hours ago. And wanted to talk about a prayer ministry that God's laying on his heart, which is fantastic. We had a terrific spiritual conversation for about 45 minutes. That's what technology can't give you. it can give him all sorts of verses on prayer. It can't teach him how to have a spiritual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure whether, where that fits into the life of the average church either, because typically we're not having the spiritual conversations. If all you do is show up on a Sunday morning, for example, 5 minutes after it starts and leave 2 minutes after it finishes, I don't know where the spiritual conversations fit there either. But again, I'm not laying that blame at the foot of the church per se, or leaders of the church. There's a whole culture, there's a whole system that we have embraced and allowed to develop. I do think that in this case, this young guy, he wants to start speaking, he wants to start teaching people about prayer, but he'd been thrown for a loop because 30 minutes before he saw me, he'd been talking to a couple of his co-workers who came from a different theological perspective, and he had no way of processing what they'd been saying to him about prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And their perspective was, you don't pray to influence the mind of God, you just pray as an act of obedience, period, stop. That's the end of it. And he's saying that's just not true. I just know that can't be true, otherwise I wouldn't pray. But he had no way to frame the conversation. So we had this conversation that kind of was able to help him, if you like, connect the dots. And I'm just mindful that technology can't help us connect the dots. And so the more this emerging generation is dependent on technology for the information, maybe the more they need gentlemen like you to help them connect the dots, maybe more than ever.
Can I ask you to, you say technology can't do that. You've said that a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Define what you mean by technology.
Oh, I just mean the access to information, however they access that information. So whether that's their phone or iPads or other devices, it's just simply accessing information.
Okay, I understand that. I think I agree with that. The reason I bring it up is I wonder, there are parts of technology that I think can actually assist in this process. Mm-hmm. For example, you grew up in, I'm in a somewhat, not quite rural, but not suburban. It's town and country setting. The largest town that I drive to has maybe 1,000 people in it, and I live just outside it. So if that gives you the idea of where we're at. Mm-hmm. And so, a kid who grows up in a town like this and goes to a small country family-dominated church that maybe has a pastor who, really just kind of preaches the gospel every Sunday, and, church is about feel good and love grandma and visit the old people. And there's lots of those kinds of churches. But now they have access to a wealth of opportunity that they never would have had that I never had when I was a kid. Now, I didn't grow up in this setting. I grew up in a more suburban setting, almost urban, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But and so I think what you're saying is the access, having your Bible on your phone, which leads you to say, well, I don't really have to memorize it because I can just search it. Or, I don't know. I guess what I'm reacting to is to say technology doesn't. I think we need to be a little more precise and say this kind of technology doesn't help it, but there are others. For example, what we're doing right now could be a huge benefit to people who are in the setting like I'm at. Are they going to take advantage of it? I don't know. But at least it's there. So technology, I think, is not the problem. It's the person's use of technology that is the problem, I think, is what we're getting. What I'm getting at.
And I would agree with that. Technology is neutral, right? It can be extraordinarily helpful. I use it every day, and we use it to enhance our lives, our scholarship for sure. I'm mindful that when we produce video clips, even when I'm doing lectures for an online course now, I do it in 12 minutes or less. Lectures in 12 minutes or less. We would never do a 45-minute lecture or 1-hour lecture because nobody watches that. I'm producing little podcast things called Jessup Think right now, which address contemporary issues. They will be 6 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes. They won't be any longer than that, because my teenage son and all of his friends won't watch anything longer than about 3 minutes. Yeah. And again, I'm not blaming technology. This is just the nature of the beast. And so although there are 1 hour and 2 hour and 3 hour programs out there available, whether the large Christian population is accessing them, I think, is another question.
Question. I know you. It's a question that I obviously we can all answer. But all of us can kind of remember going to school and getting that conversation from the librarian or head research person, and I'm speaking of college and later, getting that discussion where they said, this is how you use the library, this is how you do not plagiarize, et cetera, et cetera. We got that instruction, and that instruction ended up being, fairly valuable, even if not always heeded by, the person to your left and the person to your right.
Yeah.
But where, because if we understand as a body, and I know on the academic side, that's especially for our Christian schools, that is a major point of contention. How do we, emphasize that the technology at hand or in your hand has made information accessible, but it has not made relationship as accessible. You still got to do the work of relationship. You still got to do the work of learning how to have boundaries, learning how to trust folks, learning how to vet character. I wonder what's missing in our instructions there. We can teach folks how to do it in a book, but it doesn't seem like we're getting that, that same kind of lesson as it relates to these tools that we're using right now.
Yeah, Antoine, I think you make a great point, and that is that this is not a new problem, right? The printing press was technology, and it produced books that simply communicated often information, maybe in a little more of a prolonged way that invited longer reflection and discourse. But that also is technology, and we've always had to say that the book itself is not the focus, that the book, even scripture, points us to Christ. That it's not the book that saves us, it's Christ who saves us. The book has a purpose, a greater purpose than itself. We've always had to say that about technology. And I just, part of what I'm just reflecting out loud and wondering about with you three gentlemen this evening is how we keep that very message you highlighted out in front of people, so that we realize that the technology has value, it has a place, it's important, it's useful, but by itself it also has some inherent deficiencies. And information does not necessarily equate to learning, and it certainly doesn't necessarily equate to transformation. So simply to have the information is not to be a transformed person. And I don't know how we keep that in front of people, except we do everything we can, and we do it as often as we can.
And what's already been alluded to is that this is not necessarily a new issue. The form of it's new, but transformation especially. If the millennials have the modern technology as their excuse for not knowing the Bible, I mean, what's our generation's excuse for not knowing the Bible? Because one thing I've observed over the years in the church is there's a difficulty in getting that connection between what's taking place here on Sunday when we're gathered together to the entire rest of the week when we aren't together, because there's so many people who don't make that connection, and they live their lives throughout the week as if nothing that took place on Sunday mattered. It's completely compartmentalized, and there's certainly I feel like probably not just millennials, but also my generation. I want to feel like, I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like that we're not as big in general. I probably, not counting the four of us, but in general, the people who are in the church, I feel like they're probably not as biblically literate as the generation before. The generation before that, and part of it's the distraction of technology and so forth. And but how do you is it a discipleship issue? Is it but because in every church that I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of what I feel like are some good churches, discipleship was usually always the weak point. We talked a lot about getting people in the doors, but we didn't always know what to do with them once we had them.
Yeah, you're precisely right. And I was chatting with this morning. I was teaching from Romans 8 to a class, and we're talking about what it means to live by the Spirit, walk by the Spirit, to set our minds on the Spirit, all part of Romans chapter 8. And one of the observations I made to them was that as a kid growing up, I was told the things to know and believe, but I was not taught how to practice the presence of Christ. I think that goes to what you're saying,
Yeah.
Rick.
Right.
That maybe I was more biblically literate, and maybe I wasn't. It probably depends on which kids you compare with which kids. But what I wasn't taught was this other level of discipleship, which is what it means to follow the Master. And I knew a lot about the Master, but I didn't know what it was to be attentive to his voice. And so we had an interesting conversation with a bunch of students this morning about how to attune our ears to what the Spirit of God might be saying, what Christ might be saying to us through other people, maybe just simply, to our spirit, whatever it might be. And I'm not necessarily advocating, Pentecostal theology here. I think this is Christian theology, that if Paul says this in Romans 8 and Galatians 5 to all of us, then it's something we all have to kind of have a conversation about. But I hear what you're saying, that this piece of discipleship was not something that was communicated to me. And I'm not, part of what I'm grappling with is whether technology, whether it's a book or it's an electronic piece of technology, whether this really helps me naturally gravitate in that direction or not.
Well, I think, Antoine's wearing the shirt. We had a man on our podcast a while back from this organization that I have on screen now called Uncommon. And basically it's an app that helps dads relate to their families and their kids, and with little ideas, and go out on a free date. And anyway, it's just a really cool service that is great. It's kind of geared, or at least it was, I haven't looked at it recently, towards dads with young kids, but that may have changed. But the reason I bring it up is, maybe what we need is this kind of a tool that leads you in this direction of going deeper with people and with your Savior outside of technology. In other words, the technology is the tool that reminds you to put down the technology to do the things that you've been discussing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because discipleship has always been a mentoring experience, hasn't it? It's been a relational thing. And
while you were talking, I wrote that down about the uncommon, and then you made the comment, is it really, maybe it was you or Rick, about is it a discipleship matter? And I think that's it. I think that the modern church generally, again, we're speaking very generally, there's always exceptions, but the exception proves the rule. The modern church has, I think, almost abdicated responsibility for discipleship to third-party, or para-church organizations. Almost exclusively are doing that. And most people's discipleship, they're getting it from books, from publishers, or from, they subscribe to email lists from, the Navigators, or whatever. They're not getting it in their Sunday school classes like they should. And I'm a pastor, and I'll have to say I'm just as much at fault for this as anybody else. And so I think you're right that, it makes a lot of sense. But I'd like us to kind of jump now to the second point that you made. The social media increases social contact while it decreases social competence. We've kind of already been talking about that, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we have a little bit, Kevin. And, again, this came out of my conversation with this, very limited number of students. I had, 13 of them. So I can hardly say I've polled thousands and drawn firm conclusions, but they are socially connected, but I did not see them being socially competent. So their ability to sustain a conversation at a meaningful level, if they could chip in every now and then with a one-liner, it felt great and they felt comfortable with that. But ask them to explain something at any length and they felt intimidated, awkward. And again, I'm dealing with a young group of people or a group of young people, I should say, who, may be intimidated even if they're enormously articulate. But part of our conversation was, hey, you've got X number of friends on Facebook, Facebook, you've got X number of followers on Twitter and Snapchat and so on and so forth. But how has this increased your social competence? In other words, your ability to actually live in relationship with people rather than simply share information with them. And it was just a curious thing for us to talk about.
Ooh.
This is the modern American family, right?
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is we're these people actually might be texting with each other on Facebook or whatever, but they're not really communicating. And I think what you mentioned, I see that too in my own kids even, or in people in my church. Their conversations almost sound like the social media conversations that I read on Facebook and Twitter and such. They're just a bunch of, like you said, and I think you said something like that. You said they can throw in a one-liner every once in a while, but they can't go in depth about serious issues.
Yeah, it was really funny seeing that picture because I was in a restaurant 2 weeks ago and saw that exact situation. And my kids on their phones and didn't know how to communicate with the family. In fact, he just sat there while the family continued until she looked up and then said to the kids, "Let's go now." And then he finally stood up. And I was there with my family. We were chit-chatting, and I'm watching this other table, and it was just fascinating to see that he had nothing to say to the family. Here is one of the few opportunities a family might have to be together around a meal. It was on a weekend. It was a Saturday. And they simply couldn't talk to each other. And that picture was more real than we'd like to admit, I think.
Yeah, there was some app I remember hearing about a while back that everybody could install it on their phone, and what it did, it made the motion sensor that would send off an alarm, and the app was something about it told everybody to put their phone down in the middle of the table, and the first person's phone to go off, they had to pay for the meal. Because that way it kept them from using their phone. Maybe we need something like that on college campuses or in family. It won't work with the family because dad and mom of course are going to pay the bill. Little 9-year-old Johnny
game,
for a $40 meal. But was that, Antoine?
That's a phone game. So that's I say it's a game, but it's a part of the social contract. My friends in East London and South London seem to be the first folks that have documented it, but basically when a lot of folks go out, they all put their mobiles in the middle of the table, and the first person to grab the mobile is the one who picks up the tab. So
yeah.
I think there's a route for things like that, but it goes back, unfortunately, what I've noticed from folks who've grown up in mostly Christian households. And I say mostly Christian households, meaning that they've been believers or their family has a pretty good faith tradition. Unfortunately, I've noticed when that social media mobile phone thing hits in public spaces, they seem to be more cloistered or at least more into their mobiles than some other groups. Outside of those between the ages of 11 and maybe 15, where nobody stops them on their phones at all.
Well, in the old days, the kids always wanted to be somewhere else, and now they kind of can.
Great.
Being with their friends, and the other aspect of it too. When I look at this title here, social media increases social contact. To me, it doesn't. For instance, I've seen some young people's Facebook pages where they'll have, thousands. I don't know what the limit is. I know Facebook has a limit of how many friends you can have, but I've seen people that have 2,000 Facebook friends. I've got a large number, in my opinion. I mean, it's 600 or 700, I don't know, and it's a combination of people I went to high school with, people I went to college with, people I've known over the years, people who have gone to different churches with. Former students of mine, and a regular occurrence for me, and maybe this is just my age, but a regular occurrence for me is that someone will comment on something I put on Facebook, and I'll think, okay, now who is this person? Obviously I have to know them. If they're commenting here, we have to be Facebook quote-unquote friends, and I'll have to look at the person and look at their friends that we have in common in order to get a context. Okay, yeah, that's where I know this person from, and I just can imagine what it's like for a young person who has 2,000 or 3,000
Well, see,
contacts
that's where
there.
the difference is there, Rick. So there's an article, and I really wish I can go find it again, but it was a young lady, um, a woman who was writing an article. It might have been BuzzFeed, but she asked her sister to basically teach her how she uses Snapchat. And what she thought, she went down the line that you just went down, is that, you have all of these folks on your Facebook feed, how do you keep up with them? And the answer was something to the effect of, I don't. I'm only on Facebook because all you older folks are there. And that's the only reason. Her intimate circle is around a social network that nobody in that other social circle uses. So in her case, it was Snapchat, and it was literally, she had 13 friends on Snapchat. So her social media contract was based on what service that she and the people that she considered closest to her to use. And if you weren't in that circle of 13, she didn't even place her attention there. Now, that doesn't mean she didn't pay attention to Facebook, where her family was making updates, but it took extra effort. It was what we would consider, we talk about our social circles being like different onions, or we look at Dunbar's number, the 5, 15, 25, 100. For most youth that are engaged in social media, the social service that they use the most is not the one that their parents are going to even touch
Sure.
or even know about. In some cases, it's not going to be the one that they're spending all of their time in. They're going to be somewhere else because for them, the actual application, not just the communication in the application, is a matter of a social contract. If you're using Snapchat when everybody else is using Kick, you're not as popular, or vice versa. Whatever the rules of that social contract is. And there's a different, my friend who's at Albany University, she's writing too many papers on this thing, but there is a different idea of a social contract that's being had that's different than the one that we have, because for all intent and purposes, we're immigrants and they're natives to the way social media is being used. It's different and interesting, and I'm working on translating that for our conversation's sake.
Antoine, I'd love to hear you say some more about that, because we are defining social competence differently.
Mm-hmm.
My 16, nearly 17-year-old son, who is primarily text and Snapchat,
mm-hmm.
He would say he's very socially competent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying you're not. We're probably defining the phrase differently. What do you think is the impact of this electronic digital social competence on faith and the church?
It's almost the same way as it was, the rise of the devotional in the late 80s, early 90s, when everybody and their mama decided that you had to have a devotional printed if you were going to be a famous author. And all of a sudden you had these Christian bookstores pop up in everybody's neighborhood with all these devotionals. But then you heard faith leaders like, that's not a faith contract. That's not your contract. Having a devotional a day is not your relationship with God. And they're like, but the folks who are into devotionals are like, but yeah, we are. We're just not doing it the way you did it.
Exactly.
We're not
You just said something, Antoine, there that jumped out at me that I'd like to address, if you don't mind me interrupting you.
Yeah.
I just wrote this down. Is this a generational thing? We're scared, but it's not that bad. In other words, I wish that we had a millennial sitting here saying, you guys talk about how bad this is, but and then they could make the defense for their forms of social interaction. Is it just a case of, I hate that rock music by a bunch of old people? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to ask the question. I'm not saying that that's the case. It may be that, yeah, it is. It's really that bad, and the sky is falling. I just want to ask the question so let's think critically. Are we just, because it's different from what we're used to or what we think is the best, does that really mean it's bad, or is it really bad? What do you think?
No,
I don't know the answer to
no,
that.
Kevin, that's a great question. I mean, we do have to understand, and David, you guys have way more letters after your name than I do. Way more letters after your names than I do. But there is a truism to, the things that I experienced as a teen are the thing that are, it's kind of my truth stick. That's where my truth stick stops. Anything that was invented after I was a teen up to the point I was 30 is still magical. Anything after I was 30 is those whippersnappers. It's not mine. There's no sense of ownership to some generations over what's happening with technology now. And I say some generations because those who were born and raised throughout the 50s and 60s cultures of, drugs and all that really cool illicit stuff, who were the guys that actually and the ladies that built the internet, they jump at this with, reckless abandonment. This is exactly the kind of world, that they see for themselves. So it's not merely generational, but there is a generational component to it. There's I don't own this. We don't have control of this. And because you don't have control of it, there is a quickening to dismiss it as evil or wrong before you get to the point of saying, well, hold up, let me wrap my mind around it to make sure that it's not necessarily evil or wrong. There are some parts of this that don't compute, but there are some things about it that don't reconcile so easily. And you don't really ask a teenager to interpret for you what their life means. A teenager can't do that. They don't have that maturity set. But at the same time, what's happening in social media spaces and mobile, it's about the youngest person that you're going to ask is about 30 to 35 years old, kind of my bucket. You're not going to go much younger than that because, for lack of better terms, if you're not old enough to be elected president, your opinion doesn't really value. That 35-year-old and up range really does say something in terms of validity. Whether it's good or bad is a whole different story. And so there may be, like you said, Kevin, there may be something generational to that. Some studies point to it, but it takes years to do those studies, and right around the time that they come out, something new has came on the horizon.
What do you think, Rick? Curious about your thoughts on that.
Which part specifically? What do you mean?
Well, the whole thing really, but this last part that we've been talking about, I just asked the question: Is it really that bad, or are we just old farts who are scared of the change?
Well, I think there's always generational walls. I mean, back 15 years ago, I was teaching high school students, and I wanted to go into that. I wanted to go into that arena and have an immediate connection, and you don't get that. You have to earn that. That's what I discovered, because what I realized the very first day, even though I didn't consider myself very old at the time, the very first day I'm in front of a group of, high school juniors, and there's this immediate wall that's there between us because of the age differences, and that takes some time to, you have to get to know people to get past those prejudices that can go both ways. But this speaks to it. Does it? Social media can decrease that social competence as well. And going back to the earlier part of the discussion, Antoine mentioned daily devotionals, and we talked about discipleship and things like that. Daily devotionals were kind of a step removed, but even something like discipleship, I think discipleship, I know for me in my life, it was helpful when it was kind of a one-on-one thing. When it was the big group thing, it was kind of difficult, and I can imagine doing discipleship, although I'm sure it's done, and I'm sure it's probably done effectively, and that's fine. So, but I would find it difficult to do discipleship via the internet or via purely via social media, although I'm sure that's done out there. But and so maybe that's a generational thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and Rick, I'd just chip in there and say, it's not an either or. It probably is a both and.
Yeah.
And when we reduce it to one and not the other, we probably sacrifice something. I'm discipling a young guy now, another one of our students, 20-year-old. he came to me and said, hey, could we just meet once a week for 30 minutes? We try and do that most weeks this semester, but he is using technology to communicate with me every day. So during Lent, he's been reading some reflections, and every morning, he's up at 5 in the morning, and he's reading this devotional. Antoine, he's still using them. He reads a devotional, and then he sends me an email, often before 5:30 in the morning, of just reflecting on it, which has been very, very powerful for me to be able to read and then shoot him a note back. But it can't replace the face-to-face.
Yeah.
And for us to be able to put that in there as well. So I saw him today, and Justin, so, you wrote some stuff this morning that was really very powerful. How's that playing out throughout your day? Because I bumped into him along the way. Very, very powerful to have both, actually, because he probably wouldn't be able to articulate himself that vulnerably face-to-face. So the technology has actually been helpful in terms of creating a vulnerable space. But without the face-to-face, it becomes somewhat disconnected from him. And so we actually need to learn both the social competence that comes with face-to-face, as well as the social convenience that comes through the technology. And I'm experiencing the benefit of both.
Well, and that makes sense. And I think what for me, the technology can't replace the face-to-face, and that's exactly what you're describing. And I think back again, I think back to even earlier generations than mine. But when I was a child, my grandparents, for instance, lived about 3 hours away, so we saw them. They were close enough that we could see them 4 or 5 times a year, but we didn't talk on the phone that often because that was long distance and that was expensive and so forth, but we'd write letters every now and then too, and that's kind of a lost art. But now, one of the benefits of technology is that I'm kind of in contact with my parents throughout the week, and hopefully my mother's not watching this, but I accuse her of texting like a teenager because she texts these real long blocks, but that's a level of contact that I know that my parents were not able to have with their parents. And to me, that's a benefit of technology. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that, well, since we can text or call for free or whatever, we don't have to see each other. We still value those times of getting together throughout the year and spending that time face to face.
And I'm guessing that's quite a different experience for you, Rick, that the face-to-face conversations are quite different from the conversations you might have via text or
Oh,
Skype.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I disagree.
Well,
You would disagree, Antoine?
I'm the younger one. I can disagree. I will say
at the risk of
I will say this real quick. So the other gentleman that usually on our hangout, La Rosa Johnson, La Rosa and I actually talked to each other over text and instant messaging for 7 years before we saw each other face to face. Literally became best friends with each other over over Google Hangouts. Before Google Hangouts was Hangouts, but Talk.Google. And I find it really interesting because there are other friendships I've had over the same amount of time, same nature of development, but to the point of this idea that you can't have a valuable relationship in a digital space. Hey, there's my other young friend. There's an ability to do so that seems a little bit easier if you're a little more towards the digital native side. That doesn't seem to be as rooted in physical presence as much as it is eye presence. That I have your attention, and if I have your attention, that seems to be enough of a tether with which that some folks, I'll say younger than my 35 years, are able to use with which to start a meaningful relationship. It's interesting.
But Antoine, if you had maybe lived in the same city as La Rosa and you could get together and hang out, would you have at any points? But would you at any point you've said, well, we chat and we see each other on the internet, so we don't have to hang out? I mean, what I was saying is there's still value in that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like there's what's the ideal, and then but if we don't have the ideal, is this an alternative that can get us through until the ideal is possible? For example, Rick and I have never sat across one another face to face, Wes and I have never sat across one another face to face.
But I'm quite fond of you, Kevin.
Antoine and I have rarely, just maybe 3 or 4 times that we've met face to face, and that's only because he used to live just down the road in Charlotte. And yet I count the 3 of them, and LaRosa, who's not with us. LaRosa and I have seen each other once, I think, face to face, and yet I count the 3 of you guys as some of my closest friends. But we all are kind of like, boy, I wish we could get together sometime, that face-to-face thing. I brought my son in. We had said, I said, I wish that we had a millennial here that we could ask this question. And lo and behold, we have one. My son is, how old are you now? 72 months? No, 21, and just about to turn 22. He is a Bible student at Fruitland Bible Institute. And Michael, we're talking about, the idea of social media, how social media, we're discussing an article that David Timms, who's on here with you, he's the one you don't recognize because you've never seen before, is a professor out at William Jessup University, and he wrote an article that we're discussing, and he wrote it, one of the lines that we're discussing in the article is social media increases social contact while it decreases social competence. In other words, you have more contact, but are you as good at being social with people if you only do it through chat and through Snapchat and Facebook Messenger and text message and things like that? And so I actually thought, maybe Michael's free, getting home from Staples and where he works, ask him that question. What do you think? Do you think you and your friends can get really super close through Snapchat and text and things like that? Or do you think, to really get to that level where you get Christian interaction with your brothers, it has to be a face-to-face at some point?
For me, I am the oddball out. I will admit that, because I don't like texting as much as I like personally talking to someone face-to-face. And so I look at it from the standpoint that, like, if I met a girl and I'm texting her and we're becoming more interested in each other, I notice, though, that she can be a little bit more awkward with me, but when we text, she's more interactive and she responds better, but in person she doesn't want to talk. I have to order for her, things like that. And you even experienced it, Dad, whenever I brought a girl home, how she would have me talk to you guys, you and Mom, for her. And so looking at the standpoint of being in a Christian school like this, social media helps us interact with people who we can't see face to face, and that is a good witness. But it doesn't help with a personal relationship you have. And I try very hard not to text the guys up here a lot and Snapchat with them, even though in Twitter and Facebook, and I have all of them on all that. But I try to spend more time personally with them, one, because we're brothers in Christ, which we're commanded to help each other grow and keep each other accountable. Secondly, I'm older than them, because a lot of the newer students are 2-3 years younger than I am. And there's even the guy who's my neighbor, and I love him to death. I consider him to be one of my best friends. But the reason I consider him to be one is because we are not confined to the world of social media to interact with each other. I can go over there and walk right into his room and sit down and have a deep conversation, and it'd be okay. It's not awkward. And he has that same freedom with my room, But we text because we have to if the need arises, like if he's somewhere else, and not able to get a hold of me. There is that. But I do believe with social media growing, people are able to talk with more people. But it does hurt social interaction extremely.
So he's proving your point, David.
Yeah, and one of the things, Kevin, that just crosses my mind, and I know you're probably watching the clock, but not social media, but electronics allow me to control a situation in a way that face-to-face doesn't. So if you text me or Snapchat me, I'll get back to you if I want to and when I want to. And of course, I can carefully manage and control what I send you. And if I'm afraid of what you might think of my comment, I can attach an emoticon or an emoji to it, and that's all well and good. I control the relationship a lot more easily with technology. If I'm angry, I can take a little while to cool down. You'll never see me at my heated worst unless I send you a flaming something back. Technology lets me control the situation so much differently than if you and I sat down and we feel like, man, we just talked ourselves out in 10 minutes. Now what do we do? and to avoid that kind of uncomfortable silence and awkwardness of being around someone when we don't know what else to do, what next to do, technology certainly becomes a benefit in those circumstances. And I think that's a piece of what I mean by social competence. And again, none of these statements can be blanketly applied to everybody, because it simply wouldn't be true. But these are certainly dangers that we want to have a conversation about.
I want to go to your third point just real briefly. You said social media has created a culture of interruption, and let me just give you just my own personal testimony of this very day. I woke up early. My wife was out of town, so I woke up alone, which I always wait. What's going on here when that happens? But first thing I did, I pulled out my phone and opened up my Bible app and started reading my Bible, and then the do not disturb time ended, and I started getting ding ding messages, and I kept finding myself being distracted from doing what I needed to be doing. And I'm the guy who says a digital Bible is so much better than a paper Bible. I've pretty much put away my paper Bibles. I never use them hardly ever. But just this morning I was thinking to myself, maybe this isn't a good idea. And so it was a weird experience, and this is what you're talking about, this culture of interruption. But what you said is this impacts our faith deeply and broadly. Have we lessened our capacity to be still, to focus, to be attentive, and to be undistracted in God's presence? And I think what's been going on in my life over the last few months, just, I've had some personal transitions in my thoughts and feelings about some things. I won't go into all that, to shorten the conversation, but I'm beginning to feel this and starting to think, maybe I need to pull out the paper Bible in order to have that uninterrupted, quiet moment where it's all God's, and get away from, leave the technology in the bedroom, go to another part of the house where it's not there, and sit down and spend that time alone. So I'm guessing that's kind of what you were getting at there, right?
Yeah, it is, because there's something very addictive about interruption. So the very nature of addiction often, and I mentioned the gambler here, it's the unexpected. It's if everything was predictable, if everything came every 2 minutes, and there was a ding every 2 minutes on the 2 minutes, and it was the same person every time saying the same thing, we'd stop looking. But in fact, we're fascinated by something that's different. So, our older generation, it might be email, right? And so every time I turn around, I've got to reconnect to the web and just check the email, because there might be something from someone that I don't know about, something that I didn't expect, and there's a certain little rush when it's there, and that's the very nature of addictive behavior. And it's the same with texting, it's the same with Snapchatting, that I suspect that the interruption is actually not a pain to us, it's a pleasure. And the interruption actually stimulates us. It doesn't grieve us. And to the extent that we start to crave the interruption, I just asked the question that you read a moment ago, have we lost the capacity to be still, to be focused in the presence of God? And I just think that each person would want to ask that question for themselves, of themselves.
Great point. Well, I hate to say this, we are getting close to being long, unless someone's got something they desperately wanted to input here in this conversation.
Well, that last aspect too, I think is, and I don't, not that you said that it wasn't. I think that last aspect is true multi-generationally. With, like you said, it'd be email with, and I go from morning to to evening with, I have to check those kinds of things too. And I can even remember today I was working and trying to get things done, and there was a Skype call coming in, and then there was text, and then there was email, and I was trying to get these things done, and it is kind of a rush, but it is also very frustrating at the same time. And even the best addicts at some point are just miserable, and I think that's that's affecting. I think that's part of the technological culture that we're living in today. And I even think, okay, if I'm 88 years old in the nursing home, will it be okay then to just completely unplug?
That's interesting. I'm beginning to frame things different, and maybe because I think it was Cloud and Towns' book Boundaries that helped me frame things different. I've learned to put technology in its place. That makes sense. I've learned to, and for example, in my apartment, which is new to me, we just moved in a few months ago, I have a rule for my bedroom. The only technology allowed in my bedroom is my Apple Watch. It's simple, no tablets, no laptops, no nothing. The email rule is in effect from 11 p.m., no email from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. every day. I've learned to put bounds on the technology. And I think when we all get to that point, or going back to the first point, when we all start teaching to that point, how do we put bounds on ourselves with this technology? I think spiritually we'll be able to kind of find our place a little bit easier.
I think that would be a phenomenal conversation to have as you were discipling someone, Antoine. Because I don't know many people who have those kind of boundaries clearly articulated and firmly in place. And I think that's fantastic that you've been able to implement that, and I would think that is a genuine discipleship suggestion from you for other people.
Yeah, I think this has been a good conversation, and
For
that's
myself.
Takeaways that can really benefit. I don't want us to all just be, oh, it's so bad, but that's a good takeaway from it. We have hit just about hit the 10 o'clock hour, and I think tonight we're going to go forego our favorite things.
We can't. I got to show my favorite thing because I have to see your face.
All right, we're gonna forego Rick. You and I.
Yeah,
we'll forego our favorite things.
No problem.
Antoine, I forgot, said this just before the show started, that he said, "Oh, I've got something really special. I really got to show you."
I have to
so
show.
We're gonna let you show what's really special, and boy, this better be good, pal.
All right, so you guys can see my screen right now, right?
Oh, does he have his iPad Pro?
I have the Pro.
That's your favorite thing. Is it a pencil?
No pencil, just the Pro. Oops, I can't
just
show
the
that.
Pro. You without the pencil? That's very strange.
No, I did not get the pencil because I have 53's pencil.
And that works really well.
I really like that very much. But I purchased it last week. My wallet is still yelling at me about that.
Does that look familiar, David?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that shot.
Australia.
And Antoine, what are you using right now for us to see you with if you aren't using your iPad?
I'm using the Mini.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we will very much enjoy hearing more about that on next show.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
probably have lots of questions.
About it then.
And when did you get it? Just this week? When did you get it, Antoine?
Last Thursday.
Last Thursday. So you have had it a few days. Yeah. Well, after a full week and a half, you'll have a lot more thoughts and feelings about it. So that'll be a good, interesting discussion.
It's still my favorite device.
What's that?
I said it's still my favorite device.
Yeah. Well, David, I just really thank you. This has been, I think, for me personally, one of the most thoughtful Theoteks that we've had in quite a while, and I've really enjoyed your ideas and your thoughts. And thank you for writing the article, and thank you for coming and talking more about it with us and getting us to think more deeply. We're a bunch of tech gadget freaks at heart, all of us here. Even my son there is, and yet this hit me right in the right time because I was having these thoughts earlier today that I'm an addict, literally. I don't feel like I can go cold turkey like I would if I was an alcoholic or a drug addict. just because of how my whole life is centered around it. But I need to find some boundaries, and I'm going to begin doing that. So I hope that you'll, all of you guys will be praying for me and keeping me accountable in those areas. So, but thanks for being with us, David.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks, Kevin, and nice to meet you, Rick and Antoine, and Mike.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
Down
Meet you,
and
David.
Yeah, in case I didn't introduce you properly, this is my son Michael Purcell. He's been on with us one other time, and so I should have said his name.
It's a pleasure to have time
Goes
with
by
you.
Mikey online. That's so weird for me, because I remember when he was a little 2-year-old and we tried to call him. Someone called him Mike, and he said, "My name is Michael." So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for being with us tonight. And remember, as always, you can find us at theotek.com. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, thank you for watching, and please subscribe so you can get updated every week when we post a new one. You can go to theotek.com and also receive an email. There's a little thing right off to the corner there saying you can get an email every time I post a new episode. And you can follow us on iTunes and on Stitcher Radio, which also means you can get it on just about any podcast app that you would like to use on an Android phone or Windows phone or anything. And we would love to hear from you. We actually did hear from a few people this week. We had some comments. We don't really have time to get into that, guys, and I'm sorry for those of you who took the time to write to us. One of whom was a tutorial on how to install BibleWorks and Word Search on a Chromebook, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I've already closed my email inbox, so I can't even give the guy name recognition, but we'll try to do that next week. Maybe we'll throw this up here next week. You guys help me remember to do that next week so we can give him credit. But I'll put a link to this in the show notes so that you guys can figure out how to do this as well. But we're done, and I'm sorry to say, I know I want to thank all the voters out there, but after tonight I'm going to have to suspend my campaign, and so but please continue to contribute, because I've got lots of debt and things, and so I'd love to get those contributions. I'm kidding.
Don't worry.
Good night.
Thanks, gentlemen.